I've been through our used department here at Park Cameras and I've taken 4 cameras. It's the core models of the Canon 5D range, so the Mark 1 through to the Mark 4. So what better time than now to have a look at that family a little bit more in depth, the core range of the 5D series. It's Throwback Thursday. Welcome back to Throwback Thursday, where we take a look at some of the slightly more interesting items in our ever-growing Park Cameras used department. Now this week, I've raided the Park Cameras used department. I've grabbed 4 cameras. So we've got the 5D Mark 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're looking at the core range of the 5D family. Now we're not looking at the 5DS, we're not looking at the 5DSR, but I think the core 4 are very, very interesting. The 5D series is an absolute pillar of photography. You've got photographers around the world using various models within that range for all kinds of different things. Food photography, studio photography, portrait, landscape, loads of stuff. They're an incredibly popular series of cameras, and with good reason as well. So we're going to dive into what makes them so special, starting at the beginning with the 5D Mark 1. The one that started it all, introduced in August 2005, and it actually holds up better than you'd think. It's obviously showing its age a little bit now with things like autofocus, speed, the lack of live view, and also that full frame resolution. But otherwise, image quality wise, it's actually really, really nice, and you can get some great images from it. So let's run through some specs on this camera. Now you've got a 13 megapixel full frame sensor, 9 autofocus points, 3 frames a second continuous shooting, an ISO range of 50 to 3200, and it weighs 895 grams. Now to be honest, you could definitely do a lot worse than this camera. It's a really great way to get into kind of full frame photography. Now we took this camera out when we did the 500 pounds challenge, took a bunch of photos. We're going to take it out again, take some photos in a moment. I actually think this is quite a decent camera considering the age. It's almost 15 years old. This certainly does show its age in certain areas, but image quality wise, this does a great job. Now next up we have the Canon 5D Mark II. Introduced a little over 3 years later in September 2008, the 5D Mark II is still used by a lot of photographers today. It's actually a great way to get a very capable full frame camera for a pretty affordable price. It has some pretty big upgrades over the Mark 1 in terms of resolution, adding video, adding live view, ISO performance. So let's just run through some of that spec. So you've got a 21 megapixel full frame sensor, you've got 9 autofocus points, 3.9 frames a second continuous shooting, you've got a 3-inch LCD screen, so a little bit bigger, and it's also got live view now as well. ISO range of 50 to 25,600, so that's pretty big expansion there. And you've got video in this camera, so you can do full HD at up to 30 frames per second. Now the Mark II definitely has some pretty big upgrades over the Mark 1, but it's quite immediately noticeable when you use it. Not least things like live view on the LCD screen, much improved resolution, video in there, much expanded ISO range. There's quite a lot here. And the Mark II is actually a great way now, considering it is still a fairly old camera, it's a really great way of getting into having a really quite capable camera, but not for crazy price. It's definitely one I would recommend to anyone who wants to get a good camera but on a budget. This is definitely a good option, I think. And it's really quite capable and versatile as well, which is key. Up next, we've got the Canon 5D Mark III. Now, this was introduced in March 2012. And the Mark III is used by photographers today around the world. It's got improved autofocus over the Mark II. ISO performance has had an improvement, faster speed. It has a lot of features that professional photographers want. So you've got a 22 megapixel full frame sensor, 61 autofocus points, so a big jump up there, 6 frames a second continuous shooting, so quite a decent jump in speed, 3-inch LCD screen with live view, much like the Mark II, ISO range of 50 to 102,400, so again quite an expanded ISO range, and you've still got video full HD at up to 30 frames a second. Now the Mark III actually has some big upgrades that aren't so obvious just within the spec. When you're shooting with it, it just feels a lot faster, low light performance is better. Autofocus has had a big increase, so just saying it's 61 autofocus points doesn't really do it justice. It's much faster, it's much snappier, it's very, very good, it's a big upgrade. Now a lot of people actually use this camera for video as well, installing other software on there as well. But this is a very versatile camera. You know, I actually know a couple of pro photographers who use the Mark III because they've been using it since it came out, and they're very, very happy with it. They don't feel any need to get anything else. It's a great camera. Definitely worth a look at, and we're going to take it out in a second and try it out. And then finally, we've got the Canon 5D Mark IV. Now, this was introduced in August 2016. It's the latest of the 5D series. And the Mark IV is incredibly popular, and that's understandable. You know, there's been big upgrades to things like the sensor, the speed again, the LCD screen, which now is a touch screen. Video's had a big upgrade as well. There's a lot to offer here for any photographer. So you've got a 30 megapixel full frame sensor, so a nice decent resolution. You know, that's enough to crop in post if you want to. You're going to get a nice amount of detail. 61 autofocus points again, so nice autofocus. 7 frames a second continuous shooting, so a decent speed. One of the bigger upgrades is the 3.2 inch touch LCD screen, which means you can touch to focus, touch to operate, things like that. ISO range of 50 to 102,400, much like the Mark III, and then you've got video with 4K at up to 30 frames a second and full HD up to 60 frames a second. Now, the 5D Mark IV was a hugely popular camera, still is. It's used by professionals across the planet for all kinds of things, you know, landscape, portrait, studio, food. I know loads of pro photographers who use the 5D Mark IV. It's just a very, very nice camera to use. So let's take these 4 cameras out. Let's take some images. We're going to take a few different images, and then we're going to take one specific sample image with all 4, the same image, and see how they compare, you know, because I think we'll be surprised. So image quality wise, there's probably not going to be a huge amount of difference between the 4 of them, you know, not unless you print it up really big. Obviously with the 5D Mark IV and the 2 and the 3, you're going to be able to crop more than you could with the 5D Mark I, and with the 4, you'd certainly be able to crop even more. But a basic composition, image quality wise, I think is going to be really nice on all 4. It's when you get into things like low light shooting, dynamic range, stuff like that, we're going to see how much we can push and pull the files from these cameras. So let's go out and take some photos, and let's see what we get. So we've come down here to the park where we've got all 4 cameras. We're going to take some photos of various things. There's a nice kind of scene over there with the lake and the birds and the reeds and the trees, and it'll actually test the dynamic range really well. The background is quite well lit, and the foreground's relatively dark with the shadow. Then we've got a scene over that way with a bridge, autumn leaves, should make for a nice photo. And we'll be able to test out the image quality of the cameras. Now, what I'm expecting to happen is the 5D Mark I is actually really nice image quality and similar for well-lit stuff as the Mark II, the Mark III, the Mark IV. I expect them all to look good for well-lit scenes, but with a dynamic range, I think that's where we're going to see a massive difference. I think over here, where we've got the shadow in the foreground and we've got the really well-lit background, that's where we're going to see a massive difference in the cameras. I also think low light's probably an area that would see a massive difference. So we're going to try and test a few bits out, but let's start with these shots for the dynamic range. So I've taken the shot with the Mark I and the Mark II. Changing over to the Mark III, there's a noticeable difference in how the camera feels. So obviously it's not all just about image quality, sometimes it's about kind of ease of use and the actual feel of the camera, and the Mark III is probably the first one that feels actually really like just a modern camera, like I'd expect to just pick this up from one of our stores. It just feels nice to hold. It's very, very comfortable. The controls are slightly different, the way it's laid out on the back is very slightly different, it just feels good. So we're going to see how these perform. So I've just taken the last photo with the 5D Mark IV. It's a really lovely scene and all the birds just make it perfect. So we're going to go back now to the studio, to the computer, get all these photos into Lightroom and really check out how they look and how much we can play around with that dynamic range. Now, I've shot in RAW for all 4 cameras, so it's really interesting to see. Obviously, a major difference between the Mark I right up to 4 is going to be the resolution. The Mark IV's obviously got a much bigger resolution to play with, so cropping is more of a thing you can do here, but I don't think that's something we're going to need to do with these photos. But it'll be very interesting to test out that dynamic range. So let's head back to the office. Okay, so we're back in the park where we've been taking photos with all 4 cameras. I've popped them through the computer, popped them through Lightroom as well to see how much I can push and pull and get the end result. Of course, I shot in RAW, so we were able to push and pull to our heart's desire, pretty much. Now, I'm going to show you what the pictures look like straight out of camera. I'm also going to show you what I was able to do with editing. I think I probably went a bit far with the edit. I think I added... They just look very colourful, they're very saturated, but that's fine. You know, I was trying to push them a bit, you know, and see at what point, where the limits are, where the boundaries are with these cameras. Happily, I can say that actually all cameras perform really well. I think the image quality from all the cameras looks great. I think from the Mark 1 right through to the Mark 4, I think they all look really good. That was pretty much what I thought was going to happen. They're all full frame sensors, and image quality wise, really happy. I think they look really nice. Now, obviously, as you go up the range, the resolution increases. The Mark 4's obviously got a 30 megapixel sensor, so that's particularly good resolution. That means you've got more room to. It means you've got more room to crop. It means you've got more room to recompose later. But one of the big things for me was the jump up from the Mark 1 to the Mark 2. There's so many upgrades from the Mark 1 to the Mark 2 in terms of resolution, in terms of all kinds of things. You know, I listed off all the specs earlier, but it's such a big jump up. Even when you're just shooting with it, you can really feel it. So I think the Mark 2 represents a particularly good way of getting into full frame photography for someone who doesn't want to spend loads of money on a brand new camera or something like that. I think the Mark 2 is a great option. Now again, similarly, and I mentioned this down in the park, jumping from the Mark 2 to the Mark 3, similarly there was you could feel it as you go up again. It's just quality of life improvements. So there are obviously technical improvements there, but it's less full-on crazy than from Mark 1 to Mark 2. What I did notice though was the way the camera felt, the way it controlled, it all just felt better. And it was the first camera of the 4 that I got to where I thought, okay, no, this really feels like a modern camera. Definitely one I would enjoy shooting with. The Mark II was nice as well, and of course the Mark 1 as well, but they feel a little bit older, whereas the Mark III felt great. And then of course the Mark IV, the newest of the core range, is a lovely, lovely camera. You know, there's a reason it's used by so many people across the world for all kinds of different photography. It's a great tool to capture all kinds of different photography. Now, going through Lightroom, obviously one of the main things I noticed was the colour. You get those amazing Canon colours right across all 4 cameras. It looks so good. You know, it always looks good, the Canon colours. And I'm happy to say that's the case across all 4 of these cameras. But just going in and playing around with the dynamic range and stuff like that, I thought they all performed surprisingly well. The Mark 1 performed better than I thought it would. The Mark II, though, that was interesting. That performed really well dynamic range-wise. I was able to get a lot of detail back in the highlights and the shadows, more than I thought I would. That was a little bit of a surprise, actually. I thought that looked great out of camera, and I was able to just pull and push it enough to get the image I wanted to get. And then of course as you go up the range, they perform really, really well. The Mark IV has great dynamic range, great low light capability as well. But yeah, the Mark II, that was a nice little surprise. There's obviously a reason these cameras are used by photographers across the world. You know, they're very popular and for good reason too. You know, they're just lovely cameras. So going out and shooting with all 4 really felt nice. You know, it was a fun experience. Getting to experience them through the ages like that, really, really nice. Now, if you have any questions about any of the cameras, pop them down in the comments. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. You know, have you got a favourite 5D camera? Do you use a 5D camera? I know people whose favourite, you know, they use the 5D Mark III religiously. They love it. I know a friend who uses the Mark II a lot as well. I don't personally know anyone who uses the Mark I. I think a lot of people have upgraded, but it's still a great way to get a very reasonably priced full-frame camera. I mean, it's full frame. Yeah, it's 13 megapixels. The image quality is great. If you're not going to be printing massive, you're going to have an absolutely great time with that camera. It's a really fun, enjoyable camera to use. And I've got to say, the noise that it makes, that is lovely. Now, if you have any questions about any of the cameras at all, pop them down in the comments. I'll, of course, put links to all the cameras in the description so you can check them out on our website. I'll put a link to the full park cameras used department so you can check that out as well, because that's definitely worth having a look at. It's always very interesting. There's always different stuff in there. So have a look at that. I'll see you in the next video. And, I didn't say like and subscribe. I forgot it in the last video as well. Well, you know, like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. And, of course, as always, thanks for watching.